So welcome everybody. I'm Sally Shuttleworth. I'm delighted to welcome you to our latest seminar in the Sleep and the Rhythms of Life network, Torch network. Our first one, we seem to work in perhaps unexpected areas of sleep. So first of all, we had sleep and architecture, and today we've got dance music, wakefulness and embodied rhythm. We're going to have three speakers. I will introduce them in a minute. To say we'll take the three in sequence and then we'll have questions afterwards. And so for those of you online, if you can use the question and answer area on the Zoom, and then we'll take them all at the end. So without more ado, I will introduce our speakers. First of all, we have Eric Clark, who is, I should say, recently retired professor of music at the University of Oxford, but not really retired. He's a specialist in the psychology of music, musical creativity, and analysis of pop music. His books include Ways of Listening, Music and Consciousness, two series, and also most recently, Remixing Music Studies. And then second, joining us from the University of Oslo is Ragnhild Brogvik. She works at the Centre for Interdisciplinary Studies in Rhythm, Time and Motion, so a perfect partner for us. And she's in the Department of Musicology. She works right across areas of popular music, including sound spatialization, rhythm and groove. And she is the author of the forthcoming, so you would make note of this, Parody in the Age of Remix, Mashup Creativity versus the Takedown, from MIT, forthcoming. And then finally, we have Michael Diamond, who is a producer, DJ, musician, based in Oxford, but also a recently qualified doctor. So we're delighted to welcome our doctor. He's recorded albums as well, so you might like to note his most recent one, the electronic album Third Culture. And he is a resident DJ of one of the UK's longest running electronic music club nights, Simple. So his interests lie in the intersection of all this, the medical and the neuroscience, the physiological and the music. So without more ado, I will ask Eric to start.
Right. Thanks very much, Sally, and very nice to see so many of you in the room and quite a number of people online, I think. So it is a bit perverse, in a sense, for a network that's to do with sleep and rhythms of life to be talking about wakefulness. And as the abstract points out, there is a long history, a long and obvious history, in a sense, of the relationship between music and sleep in the form of lullabies. But I think what I want to kind of suggest right at the outset is that there's an interesting kind of spectrum here in which both the function of music in relation to sleep and the function in relationship to extended wakefulness, or if you like, sort of positive active energy, can be understood within a single framework. And that's kind of what I'm going to aim to do. In a recent paper,
can I just quickly adjust the camera before we've got it should be all right on this one. Just need to stand within, looking online, they couldn't see you at all. So I think you need to stand where you can be seeing there. Sorry.
And it's not actually clicking on through the slides. Perhaps I need to just do that. That's fine now.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
That needs to be in line. Maybe I turn it a bit like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So in this recent paper published in the journal Science, Samuel Mayer and a whole collection of colleagues looking at universality and diversity in human song pinpoint kind of four primary musico-social functions across a huge range of world music cultures. And the first two of those are actually lullabies and dance music. The other two, just for interest, are healing and love. So dance music and lullaby music occupy this kind of central position in human musical cultures across a huge diversity of musical cultures. And as I say, one way in which we might be able to understand them is within a common framework, and that framework is entrainment. Now, musicologists have been interested in the relationship between music and entrainment for something like 25 years. There was a rather important paper published in 2001 by an excellent musicologist called Martin Clayton with two colleagues, which kind of started the ball rolling and people thinking about what is it about music that causes people to be engaged in a very physically and embodied manner. And entrainment is the idea that many people have kind of clustered around. The entrainment itself has a very long history. Not only do human beings and other animals actually entrain to the rhythms of their environment, but physical systems can become entrained upon one another. And the discoverer of this was a Dutch mathematician, physicist, and actually clockmaker called Christian Huygens, who in the middle of the 17th century, he was the maker of the first pendulum clocks, discovered that pendulum clock in action using metronomes. So here is a little video, I hope. It's not allowing me. Oh yeah, okay. So what you'll see is 5 physical metronomes, which at this stage are obviously beating at similar rates, but out of synchronization. What Daniel does now is to put the bar on which they are a couple of implements, and very quickly, these 5 metronomes in perfect synchrony and will stay in perfect synchrony for as long as their clockwork mechanisms are running. And you can see that they do so because the energy of the mechanism is being conveyed to the wooden bar on which they sit. They are in a sense beginning to communicate with one another. They are physically coupled in a way that allows them to influence one another. When Daniel, in a minute, takes this back off the bands and puts it back on the fixed surface. So here we are, still in synchrony sometime later. He picks them up, puts it back on the surface, and you will see that they quite quickly again start to randomly wander away from one another and become asynchronous. They remain asynchronous now. So what this demonstrates is that entrainment can be the property of physical systems, and that those physical systems, in order to become entrained upon one another, need to have some kind of mode of coupling for that to happen. Well, human beings, we know, are also periodic systems in various ways, from kind of brain rhythms through to heartbeat and walking rhythms and circadian rhythms and menstrual cycles, and all of these processes have the capacity to become, first of all, entrained upon one another, and secondly, entrained upon external timekeepers of one sort or another. And it is in this kind of domain that the dance-inducing and energy-inducing effects of music have been theorized. So one way in which we can illustrate this is through collective clapping. I'm going to involve you now in a bit of audience participation. So what I want to do is to make a division down the middle of the room. So yellow on the right, and you with the lanyard, you're in group 2, and this is group 1. Can we all, first of all, start by simply applauding as if we were at the end of some sort of performance?
Can you try to entrain upon me? Overview. Okay, very good. Now, people on the right-hand side of the room, I want you to jump to be on your beats from at the point when I say so, so while we're going, I want you to go, that, okay? First of all, notice the fact that when we're trained like this, it's quite easy to maintain the kind of feeling of ease about it. Now, when I say go, You on the right-hand side, we're on the left. And go. Okay, so
Not bad. What you can feel is those people who have to make the jump, and even those people who stay with the, as it were, the on beat, there's an element of kind of disturbance there, where it's actually quite difficult to jump out of the entrained relationship that you have with everyone. But there's a kind of feeling of a sort of magnetism, if you like, that causes this entrainment to persist. So this entrainment is a rather powerful way of thinking, potentially powerful way of thinking about why it is that some kinds of music induce a powerful sense of wanting to move, and a kind of sense of wanting to move that has also quite important social benefits. So work songs are one way in which the entraining effects of music can be harnessed to increase physical efficiency and effectiveness. Sea shanties and rock-breaking work songs and all of those kinds of work songs that have a long history of being associated with the need to use powerful physical energy demonstrate that in those entrained situations, we can actually optimize collectively the use of energy in a way that allows us to become more efficient as physical operators. And they also explain why it is that dancing can be a very pleasurable and entraining and kind of trance-inducing type of activity. It induces, if you like, a kind of a change of consciousness, you might say, and that equally, at the other end of the energy spectrum, the rocking and soothing actions of a lullaby, if you think about a classic lullaby like rock-a-bye baby on the treetop, when the wind, it's got various attributes. For instance, a slow tempo, a very predictable rhythm, an extremely, conventional musical shape, usually sung at quite a low volume of singing. That all of these things induce a kind of slowing down of behavioral activity and thus kind of move towards sleepiness. Okay, so entrainment is an important way in which people have theorized how it is that music can both, if you like, ramp up and ramp down the physical behavior of people who are entrained to it. But the danceability of a piece of music is not simply a matter of entraining in a very simple way to a kind of four to the floor set sequence of only downbeats. A very wonderful DPhil student of mine called Maria Vitek, who finished her DPhil here in Oxford about 10 years ago, did a terrific piece of work in which she looked at what it is that makes electronic dance music, well, in fact, she was looking at funk music, really, but looking at dance music, what it is that makes a piece of dance music both preferred by listeners and also what makes it danceable, if you like. How can you measure the danceability of, she actually just was looking at drum tracks. So you might expect that the most danceable drum track would be something that had an extremely clear beat, no ambiguity about where beats are. But actually, we find that pretty dull. And on the other extreme, an extremely complex series of drum beats makes it hard to coordinate. And what she found is a kind of inverted U relationship between the amount of complexity, or specifically syncopation, i.e. drum hits that are not on main beats, an inverted U relationship between the amount of syncopation and the danceability of a drum track. And I can illustrate this with 3 examples coming from her own work. So you can actually produce a kind of metric of how much syncopation there is in a drum rhythm. I'm not going to tell you how exactly that's done, but here are 4 drum rhythms that range from a very low level of syncopation through to a rather high level of syncopation, with one that is somewhere in the middle. So here is the low version. And as you can hear, that's very simple, very predictable, and not particularly kind of dance-inducing, she found, and I would agree. Here, by contrast, is the high level of syncopation. which it's exactly the same tempo, but the distribution of drum hits is really quite complex in relation to where the downbeats are, and that is too chaotic for most people to find easy to dance to, whereas this in the middle has what most people find just the right kind of balance between, I mean, given that these are very simple examples, has just about the right kind of balance between complexity and predictability. So the likability and danceability of music is based on manipulating these kind of factors of expectation and complexity, and how those are manipulated in the drum track, both in terms of just simple, drum hits, but also in terms of the instrumentation and how the rhythm of the music is kind of distributed across the instrumentation, either of a drum kit or of a more complex collection of real or virtual instruments. So if that is one way of thinking about the kind of danceability and the likability of rhythms at a kind of rather individualistic and psychological level, there is also a kind of more social level to this, and it involves a notion of contagion. So work in the psychology of music, and particularly work that has looked at music and emotion, has identified that one way in which music induces people to change their mood states and to feel, either sadness or excitement or whatever, is a theory of contagion. And this theory of contagion is, again, easily illustrated, I think, by sort of an anecdote, by the kind of anecdote where you enter a room in which a whole lot of people are in an extremely excited state. It's very hard not to be drawn into their excited state. And conversely, you enter a room with a lot of people who are feeling very glum and down, and it's very hard not to be brought down by their own mood. That is a kind of contagion between individuals, but the extension of that is that we hear music, because music has person-like characteristics, as many people have argued, we hear music also as kind of having emotional qualities that are in turn contagious for those who come across them. And this little bit of video from a music festival in Canada in the 2000s, sometime, I think about 10 years ago, demonstrates a kind of, in a loose way at least, this kind of contagious effect. Here is, I'm just going to turn the volume down. I apologize in advance that the both the camera work and the sound is absolutely terrible. It's clearly taken off someone's smartphone, so it's jerking all over the place and the sound is terrible. But here at the beginning of this clip, it's a lone individual dancing to this track, and everyone's sitting around taking really very little notice of it. But we move on to about 40 seconds into this clip, being joined by another man who, in some sense, is training both with him and with the music, and some sense of kind of collectivity starting to develop. We move another 40 seconds this clip to about here. Now suddenly their activity is in a kind of contagious and collective way, using increasing numbers of people until by about this point, it's appropriately enough, the words are, I got to be unstoppable. And indeed, this is a kind of illustration of the way in which these kind of collective, entrained and contagious kind of collectivities of people can lead to this kind of sense of an unstoppable sense of energy that is shared between those people in the collective. And the sociologist Emil Durkheim, over 100 years ago, in a book which was actually mainly concerned with, it was primarily concerned with religion, coined the term collective effervescence, I think a rather lovely term, to describe the way in which this kind of outburst of energy from collective groups can take hold. And he has this description, which seems incredibly appropriate to what we've just witnessed. He says, the very act of congregating is an exceptionally powerful stimulant. Once the individuals are gathered together, a sort of electricity is generated from their closeness and quickly launches them to an extraordinary height of exaltation. Every emotion expressed resonates without interference in consciousnesses that are wide open to external impressions, each one echoing the others. The initial impulse is thereby amplified each time it's echoed, like an avalanche that grows as it goes along. And since passions so heated and so free from all control, cannot help but spill over, from every side there are nothing but wild movements, shouts, downright howls, and deafening noises of all kinds that further intensify the state they are expressing. So, turning now towards the end of my talk, just towards this notion of extended wakefulness. And for those of you who are not regular denizens of Berlin's Berghain, I am not, but Michael, of course, is. May come as no news to some of you that they have incredibly extended dance parties. So the 2019 end of year party lasted for 58 hours, and there were many people there who were there for the whole 58 hours. Apparently the 2022 dance party end of year was scheduled to last 72 hours. Whether it did, I don't know, I haven't seen reports. But so people are in Berghain for up to nearly 3 continuous days dancing and enjoying themselves. And of course, as I discussed a number of times in advance of this seminar, that's not only due to the music, there are other factors at work in this, but it is the music that is also a powerful part of what allows this incredibly collectively effervescent activity to sustain itself over such long periods of time. This, incidentally, for those of you who don't know Berghain, and as I say, I'm sadly one of those people, is what Berghain looks like, and here are some people waiting, hopefully, to get in. It's in an old power station in the eastern side of Berlin. So one of the ways in which this kind of extended wakefulness can be organized is through the ways in which DJs kind of play a crowd, and to use the phrase I've already used, by ramping up and ramping down the energy in the room through in ways that Michael is going to talk about, or at least touch upon in his own talk in a minute. And finally, before I hand over to Ragnhild, another thing about electronic dance music and the work of a DJ is the really interesting relation, the fascinating relationship, I think, that electronic dance music has in relation to, in the relationship between bodies and machines. Electronic dance music arguably has a kind of machine-like origin, possibly the origin of electronic dance music. If you were to find a single musical origin for it, it would surely have to be Kraftwerk, whose music, who started in 1970, so they're over a half a century old, their music. And that electronic music, based around the notion of a machine, and in a sense celebrating the idea that a body can be thought of like a machine, contains many of the things that then became incorporated, for instance, in the use of drum machines as the primary percussive component of a lot of that music. Now, much developed and made much more sophisticated. But at the same time, the dance floor is a place very much of fleshy bodies. So there is a really interesting relationship there, I think, in the ways in which this kind of cyborg embodiment, the embodiment in a person of both machine-like and fleshy characteristics come together in this kind of dance music. And that is a topic that I think Ragnhild is going to continue with in her presentation. So at that point, I will stop. As Sally said, we will take all questions and comments and stuff at the end. So if you do have questions that arise out of my talk, do keep a note of them and hang on to them for the Q&A session. And at this point then, I should hand over to Ragnhild in a way that I'm not quite sure how to do.
I think it's
For us. I probably need to stop sharing. And there is Ragnhild.
Hi.
Great. seeds.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you can now see my screen.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So when reflecting on how to address Eric Clark's request to present on the topic of dance music, wakefulness, and embodied rhythm, and doing so for a network concerned with sleep and the rhythm life, it struck me that different forms of electronic dance music, or EDM, as I will refer to it hereafter, afford different kinds of wakefulness and different kinds of sleepiness. So I decided that this should be the topic of this presentation. And when Eric asked me, I was working on an article on machine aesthetics that I'm co-writing with Alex Stevenson from Leeds Beckett University. And it struck me that the concept of machine aesthetics could perhaps be a useful framework for discussing sleep and wakefulness in the context of EDM. The concept of machine aesthetics has been elaborated on by Barry Brummett, who is professor in communication, who has written much about rhetoric, including his book Rhetoric of Machine Aesthetics from 1999. I will first explain his concept of machine aesthetics and its various forms before discussing how it can be applied to EDM and its triggering of various forms of sleep and wakefulness. To understand Brummett's concept of machine aesthetics, we need to clarify what he means by aesthetics and machines, as well as machine aesthetics. With respect to aesthetics, Brummett understands it neither as residing in the observing subject, nor in the object itself, but in the interaction between them. Importantly, he's not only interested in the aesthetics experience caused by machines, but also the aesthetic experiences of objects or texts that are not machines and not caused by machines, but that share aesthetic qualities with whatever a culture associates with a machine. In clarifying what Brummett means by machine aesthetics, we also need to uncover what he means by machines. He distinguishes between two types of machines, MacTech and Electrotech. These two types, which I will return to shortly, are associated with quite different qualities and connotations. While he only identifies two types of machines, he identifies three different kinds of machine aesthetics. He calls these MacTech aesthetics, Electrotech aesthetics, and Chaotech aesthetics. And these three types of machine aesthetics often occur in mixed modes, although often one will dominate. A particular experience of a text or artistic expression is likely to involve more than one of these aesthetics, and what one person experiences as MacTech, another might experience as Electrotech. In what follows, I will discuss each of these three different forms of machine aesthetics one by one. I will first discuss the particular type of machine that the aesthetics in question signifies or draw inspiration from. Then I will discuss how each of these three machine aesthetics can be applied to EDM. And finally, how the states of sleep and wakefulness can be understood in such a context. MacTech is a term that describes the machines associated with the factory or with the Industrial Revolution during the early 19th century. These machines include industrial engines consisting of metal, gears, pistons, and clockwork motors. MacTech machines are often monstrous with noisy, powerful, and space-demanding engines. Brummett explains that what many people think of when they think of a machine grounds this aesthetic. MacTech machines imitate and are controlled by the muscles and bones of the body. That is, the operation of MacTech machines involves physical labor and is typically associated with hard work, sweat, motion, and force. There is a surface depth logic in the operation, in the sense that there is a direct link between the actions of the operator and those of the machine. There is no mediators between them. With respect to MacTech aesthetic, MacTech represents the qualities of efficiency, functionalism, and simplicity. Its workings are predictable and functional, with little room for embellishment. MacTech further represents the qualities of rationalism and control, as well as mathematical accuracy and regularity. Automatism and duplicates are common ingredients. Its patterns are regular and repeated. The tasks are performed with precise and calculated measurements to be perfect and flawless. Thanks to the simplicity, functionalism, and predictability of MacTech machines, they are conceived of as unchaotic as well as honest. They reveal their working mechanisms, structures, and materials. Techno music and other EDM styles associated with club nights and dancing share several of the characteristics of MacTech aesthetics. The beats are regular and precise, sometimes with mathematical accuracy, thanks to their historical associations with step sequencers and drum machines and the quantization function, resulting in rigid patterns. The groove in this music often sounds like pumping with constant level changes at regular intervals, thanks to the use of sidechain compression. This gives association to the workings of the steam-powered factory machines and locomotives of the Industrial Revolution. Furthermore, this music is characterized by repetition and duplication, as it is often structured around looped beats. Yet, although the rhythmic framework is often quite stable and regular, there is, as also Eric mentioned, variation in how the sonic elements evolve in the treatment of the sounds themselves. In 2019, I interviewed several Norwegian producers, and they all emphasized the variations within this otherwise quite rigid framework. We listen to an example of such an EDM track that I have located within this MacTech aesthetic. So it is not only the music that imitates MacTech machines, the bodily and movements and mental states of the listeners also correlate with MacTech. Just as the MacTech machine and its operators move in a steady and regular pace, so does the bodily movements of those listening to and dancing to EDM of this kind. They are, as Eric mentioned, entirely entrained to the music and to their co-dancers. The mind also enters a state of flow, where the listener or dancer is taken out of time and place. The subject-object divide between the listener and the music collapses as one surrenders to the embodied sensation of the music. This embodied sensation of MacTech constitutes a particular state of flow, which can also be described as a sleep-wakefulness ambiguity. Michalis Csikszentmihalyi describes flow as the state in which a person is so involved in an activity and whose attention is completely absorbed by the task at hand, that everything else is momentarily forgotten. People that experience flow states stop being aware of themselves as separate from the actions they are performing. Likewise, the embodied and collective sensation of EDM at the dance floor can take you out of everyday life to a world beyond, just like sleep. Time and place becomes irrelevant, and the everyday challenges of the world are left behind. There is room for nothing more in this state than simply being. Yet, this music often encourages an unwavering capacity to keep going throughout the night, as mentioned. As such, the concept of wakefulness is just as relevant as sleep. Just as the MacTech machines goes on and on without the slightest sign of exhaustiveness, the listeners, as entrained to the music, gets into a state that accompanies great physical and mental stamina. Like operating the MacTech machines of the factory, the repetition of actions and movements requiring full attention and wakefulness can result in bodily automatism and mental detachments associated with hypnosis and sleep. It is perhaps this combination of repetition and sameness and variation and change that manages to produce this ambiguous state between sleep and wakefulness. Electrotech, on the other hand, refers to the machines that characterized the second industrial revolution, the second revolution during the technological revolution during the late 19th century and onwards. So, for example, computers, personal organizers, and keyboards. These machines differ from MacTech machines in that they depend upon electricity. In Brumman's definition, it's not enough that the machine involve electricity. What he is referring to with electrotech is high-tech machines that primarily depend upon electricity. This electric functioning of the machine allows for a smaller scale compared to MacTech machines, and they also require fewer physical means to be operated. As Brumman points out, electricity allows machines to be quiet, personal, and small, and this type of machine is controlled by the manipulation of the fingers. Whereas MacTech machines imitate and are operated by physical labor and muscles and bones of the body, electrotech machines imitate the brain and nervous systems of humans, and their operations also depend on mental effort rather than physical labor. As opposed to being associated with sweat, these machines are often associated with computer-related injuries caused by sitting in a static position for long periods of time. As opposed to MacTech machines' surface depth logic, a click on the keyboard may result in multiple effects, and it activates a world beyond the surface machine. The keyboard is simply a mediator between the operator and an unknown and endless world of opportunities. Since there are no direct connection between the controlling actions and the outcomes, the working mechanisms of the electrotech machines are, in contrast to MacTech, not readily accessible to understanding. They are thus approached by either surrendering to the incomprehensibility of its complexity, or by exploring their workings and trying to overcome and master the complexity, an approach typically associated with hackers or so-called computer wizards. With respect to the latter, Brumman ascribes the electrotech aesthetic to the explorer. The will to push on into the wilderness of cyberspace is the motive of the explorer. He says, when it comes to the aesthetics of electrotech, it represents qualities such as complexity, mystery, unpredictability, and exploration. The texts representing these aesthetics are governed by nothing but the imagination and mental capacities of its explorers. The explorers have at hand endless opportunities as they operate in the utopian imaginative space enabled by electric and digital technology. With respect to EDM in particular, this aesthetic form manifests in music that explores complexity and indulge in novelty, experimentation, and ambiguity. This kind of music may just as well be experienced via headphones or speakers as on the dance floor. In many cases, it activates the mind more than the body, and the complexity which characterizes this music may make it hard to move along to. Sometimes, however, the music can be described as a combination of electrotech and MacTech. Since everything is possible within the electrotech framework, this type of EDM often explores the intersection between humans and machines. Brumman explains that electrotech aesthetic makes machines seem more human, an equation which can rhetorically support the argument that humans are machines. He further refers to Lewis Mumford, who foresaw this merging, in noting the ways in which humanizing the machine was leading to machinizing humanity. Donna Haraway similarly notes that this blurred border between the machine and the human, propelled by electric and digital technology, has made thoroughly ambiguous the difference between natural and artificial, mind and body, and many other distinctions that used to apply to organism and machines. Mind and world are neither opposed nor merged. In EDM, it is particular the timbre and the rhythm of the sounds that are experimented with and pushed to or beyond the limits of human capacity. For example, manipulated vocals are quite common, and the rhythms and sounds often go beyond that which an instrumentalist can perform. We listen to an example of such an EDM track that I've located within the electrotech aesthetics. wakefulness that is associated with electrotech aesthetics arises from a sense of discovery of this new reality of which they are transported, where the mind is open and curious about what lies ahead. The information is often novel and complex and thus requires sustained attention. It also involves a kind of puzzle solving often, since the music often plays on ambiguity that may be perceived as a kind of unresolved mysteries. Yet this kind of wakefulness goes hand in hand with a kind of sleep. Constant stimulation can result in a tiresome experience and a feeling of overwhelmingness. Tiresome exactly because it requires too much wakefulness. Whereas MacTech is in need for variation and change to sustain the listener's participation, electrotech is in need for familiarity and repetition as well to sustain the listener's attention. Again, it is the combination of familiarity and novelty leading to an ambiguous state of sleep and wakefulness that attracts the listeners. Whereas Brummett only distinguishes between two types of machines, he introduces a third type of machine aesthetics as well, chaotech. This third kind is related to both MacTech and electrotech, but represents a particular approach to the machine. Brummett describes it as the aesthetics of the decayed machine or the dark beauty of collapsing machines. Whereas MacTech and electrotech celebrate the prosperity of the machine, chaotech represents an ironic reaction and commentary to the aesthetics of MacTech and electrotech machines by dramatizing and celebrating their decay. Chaotech, Brummett states, finds artistic joy in junkyards, disemboweled TVs, and automobile graveyards. Chaotech aesthetics does not take the machine on their own terms, but destructs, appropriates, and renews them. Similar to electrotech, chaotech is unpredictable and indeterminate, but in a more fragmented, disconnected, and shocking way than electrotech. In contrast to MacTech, it represents chaos, or at least a satisfying flirtation with chaos, as Brummett puts it. Glitch is a subgenre of EDM, which exemplifies this aesthetic well. Glitch music aestheticizes technological malfunctions, including the sound of skipping CDs or low bitrate, electric hum, and digital and analog distortion, recording hiss and scratches, and other software and hardware errors. The music celebrates fragmentation, disruptiveness, and distortion. While some EDM tracks are firmly positioned within this genre label, glitch, glitchy sounds also saturate the broader landscape of EDM, as well as contemporary pop and hip-hop. Autech, Aphex Twin, and Square Pusher are among several EDM producers who have experimented with glitchy sounds in their production. And we'll hear a track by Square Pusher now called My Red Hot Car. With respect to sleep and wakefulness, chaotech differs from the MacTech and electrotech. Whereas MacTech and electrotech both constitute a state of flow, chaotech is characterized by disrupting such a flow. Instead of seeking immersion, chaotech seeks interruption and a slight shock. The music incomplete sound, abrupt transitions between sound sequences, signal dropouts, and stuttering rhythms all interrupt the sound's natural unfolding through time. Regardless of how common cut-ups have become, part of the fascination with glitch music is that glitches introduces a tension between two levels of understanding the music. The understanding of them as cut-up necessarily implies that we compare the music to some abstract, temporally coherent model. That is, we would not experience music as cut up or fragmented without the conception that there was something to be glitched or mixed. Sounds are not so easily released from their associations with how they acoustically unfold in everyday life. The music thus evolves and affirms the listener's familiarity with sounds, even as they subverts them. And this is how glitchy music is able to shock despite its omnipresence. This kind of shock that we do not conceptualize as shock prompts a peculiar kind of wakefulness that stirs us from any instances of absent-minded consumption. Yet this ability to shock and provoke increased attention implies an alternative, a more distracted state of mind from which we are awakened. Glitchy sounds are usually combined with more stable and repetitive features, such as being inserted to interrupt an otherwise quite traditional musical expression, as we heard here. It is often this combination between expectancy fulfillment and expectancy violation that make it work musically. Again, we might describe the experience of this music as a combination of sleep and wakefulness, in the sense that we are constantly awakened by the glitchy interruptions of otherwise habitual listening mode. To conclude, MacTech, Electrotech, and Chaotech afford different forms of wakefulness as well as different forms of sleepiness. Yet what they have in common is that they play with this tension between these two states. I believe that in EDM and musical experience more generally, we find each of these two components as lacking without the other. The state of wakefulness and sleep often operate together, creating in turn a rather illuminating tension. Ultimately, the coexistence and suspension of these two perceptual forces might be one of the reasons why we find ourselves excited about the music. Musical experiences, then, may touch upon something more fundamental about human life and felt existence, namely our need for both repetition and change. On the one hand, we appreciate and yearn for novelty, unfamiliarity, uncertainty, complexity, inconsistency, and mystery. These qualities support attentiveness, interest, excitement, suspense, and alertness. As such, they evoke wakefulness. Equally important needs for us as humans, however, are familiarity, stability, predictability, comprehensiveness, and meaningfulness. These qualities support comfort, safety, ease, relaxation, and contentment. As such, they allow for the state of sleep. Sleep and wakefulness, then, are not necessarily binary concepts, but states that exist simultaneously and work together in a suspended state, a state that reveals a constant need for both rest and vigilance. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, and we now turn to Michael.
Hello. Okay, well, first of all, thanks everyone for being here. It's really nice to see my mates here, basically. It's nice. It's also nice to see loads of names I recognize in the chat room as well. So love you all. Love you all. Thank you so much for coming. This talk today is about partially my own experiences, and I've tried to tie in where I can some explanations which draws on like neuroscience and psychology as well. But yeah, how I approached this was from the mind of a DJ, and I'm going to try and explain some of these phenomena that I've experienced myself. And I know there are many DJs listening in on there and DJs in the room here, and I'm sure you guys would have also experienced these things. And hopefully I'll be able to decipher some components to them today. So first of all, just want to reiterate what we mean by extended wakefulness. And yeah, as we've discussed before, if wakefulness and sleep is a spectrum, most people oscillate between, sort of physiological normal wakefulness levels and sleep. and different things can push you in either direction. But an extreme example of where you're on the right-hand side of this and you can be pushed even further towards the right. So an extreme sort of sense of wakefulness is the excitement and euphoria and energization you might get in a club environment. And if you think about it, there are so many things about that environment which are like so conducive to enabling you to stay up for so long, you know? So just think for a second, what are those things for you guys? And quite quickly, you'll come up with a big list. Some of the stuff I've mentioned here. Yeah, the mates who you're with, any drugs or alcohol or pharmaceuticals involved, sound system, quality of the sound system, DJ themselves, your personal affiliation with them, and then obviously personal factors, like there's loads of stuff basically. It's really complicated, and all of these things interact, modulate, and feed off each other as well. One of those components is the music. And I feel like it does have some contribution in keeping you awake and energized across a night. So we're going to discuss some things within the music that I feel can contribute to that sense of energy on a dance floor. I've noticed it myself, but don't take my word for it. I've interviewed some of the world's best DJs, and you can take their word for it because they know their stuff better than I do. So I'll be focusing on four phenomena that I've noticed seems to work on a dance floor. And I'll try and link that in and explain why they work. The first is this idea of like contrast, and contrast at different levels of scale. And I'll explain what I mean by that. And that's closely tied in with this idea of tension and release. And I think whenever you've heard a DJ speak, they might use these terms like tension and release. And I think that provides a good framework to thinking about like how you can create energy on a dance floor. I'll next explain how playing weird stuff can get a good reaction. Yeah, I've got a nice example of this as well. But yeah, playing something that can really jar people and discombobulate people, get some sort of reaction, get some attention. And as a result of that attention, you know, there's going to be slight increased energy and wakefulness.
Screen be online.
I haven't been sharing my screen. Okay. Shall I end it? Did I just press Teams? Yeah, there we go.
And room to share sound. Yes, that's okay.
That's the one or this one?
No, it's-
Yeah. And share sound. Great. So for those guys online, yeah, here's a visual description of all the things that contribute to a club night, which contribute to the sense of energy on a club night. And I just made the fact that they all interact. Sorry about that, guys who are listening at home, forgive me. Okay. So yeah, go on to, I mentioned two of the things I'm going to talk about, how playing weird stuff can get reaction. I'll explain why and how. 3 is this idea of like how you can control the energy in the room. And Eric mentioned a little bit about this in his talk when he touched on the aspect of contagion and how there's intrinsic properties within music that make you feel a certain way. You know, like if I presented a sad track to you, most of you would be able to identify this as a sad track, or a happy track, most of you would be able to identify this as meant to be a happy track. So there are features intrinsic within the music that make you want to feel a certain way. And as a DJ, that's so true. Like when you play tracks, you want to create these contours in emotion, and you might guide people, you might want to make people feel a certain way, and that is reflected in your track choice across the night. And yeah, I'll go into that. And then 4thly is just playing something that some people can relate to. We all know that phenomenon when a DJ plays a tune that you know and you love, and you get gassed, you get excited that this is your tune and you can dance and enjoy yourself. And that creates some level of additional energy. and excitement, which I think is powerful, and I'll explain. We'll go into it. So I had a good chat with Object a few weeks ago. For those of you who didn't know, Object is an amazing DJ. Yeah, for me, he's one of the world's best, really knows his stuff, and he's an old alumnus of here, so clearly Oxford produces good DJs, right? Yeah, and he said this thing to me, and we talked about this quite a lot, which was a good set has contrast at different levels of scale. And he also touched on this whole tension and release concept. So I just got a quick diagram to like demonstrate this idea of contrast on different levels of scale, and ultimately it makes something interesting if there is contrast. So imagine a set, 3-hour set, let's say. This is time left to right, and yeah, it's obviously composed of individual tracks back to back sequentially after each other. There might be a section at the beginning where the DJ is playing a certain kind of vibe, maybe a bit more chill, to get everyone dancing and grooving. Then there might be a central blue section where you're playing a different kind of vibe altogether, blue music, let's say. And then thirdly, you might finish on something maybe higher energy, again, a different mood and a different sort of section of your set, if that makes sense. And when I've spoken to Object, he definitely plans these kinds of things beforehand. He has very clearish idea of section, a dancehall section, or 100 BPM section, or maybe a really warpy, discombobulating section. He has these in his mind when he's thinking about it. So that's at that very broad level of scale. There's contrast there that captivates interest, gives people attention, and creates energy as a result. If we zoom into one of these sections, that's obviously composed of individual tracks, and between tracks there is also going to be contrast. But these are all blue tracks, but they might, play on that blue theme in slightly different ways. So you can go in and out of different sort of vibes within that, and then you can zoom into a specific track as well. And the track itself structure is very basic structure. Not all tracks do this, but majority of tracks do, where they have an intro, a build up, a drop, breakdown, and build up again. And this is a sort of intrinsic tension and release cycle that's happening here. And there will also be contrast there. There might be contrast with the first drop compared to the second drop. And zooming in even further into, let's say, if we analyze maybe 8 bars of the drop, there is contrast at the level of each individual bar. Like, let's say a hi-hat in one bar going to the next bar, that hi-hat, you might pan it to the other side. And that keeps interest, that provides some sort of contrast. And contrast is the key to attention. And as a result of that, yeah, it creates very captivating musical experience going forward. And yeah, this idea of tension and release, which Object was talking about, he was basically saying there are loads of different kinds of ways in which you can create tension. You can create harmonic tension, rhythmic tension, melodic tension. There are loads of different kinds of tensions. Even within those melodic, harmonic, rhythmic, there are different kinds of tensions, and there are different kinds of ways in which you can create a sense of relief. And for him, a good set will create tension and release in a variety of ways across the set. It won't just have the same kind of tension and release every time, because that gets really boring really quickly. Like you can imagine a very simple example of like a tension and release cycle is drum roll and then drop. Very simple EDM one, which Ragnald earlier maybe have played. But Object likes to go into more complex ones, and the one that he said he was playing with a lot recently was this idea of going from rhythmic ambiguity to rhythmic disambiguation, basically. And he gave me a couple of example tracks, and these are tracks are like really weird polymetric tracks where you don't really know where the beat of the bar is. They're in really disgusting time signatures like 1723 or something. And he says that they create this really interesting effect on the dance floor where it's very discombobulating. If you play it for a certain amount of time, people can find some level of groove in it. Like Eric played the really syncopated example earlier. You can find some groove in it, but it's maybe a bit harder to listen to. But if you've entrained people in that really complex beat and you suddenly bring back a super simple rhythm, that tends to get a really powerful reaction, going from ambiguity to disambiguation, and he uses that a lot. Second, another way in which you can get a reaction from the crowd by playing weird stuff. And I have an example of this, which I'd like to play now. There's a way of switching over. Some of you will recognize this, either online or at home. It's a banging tune, it's really good. And I'll play it from here. Can we turn the volume up though? Amazing. 100%, please.
Have right there.
Okay, that's enough. So why did that work to create a reaction? I think it's acting on really fundamental systems in the brain, which are involved with arousal. And, you know, if you think about what in the environment we respond to and what is salient in the environment, we have evolved to respond to loud sounds, bassy sounds, things that are really fast moving, or things that might imply danger or opportunity. And this track, I think, is really acting on these very basic arousal centers in the brain to like create that sense of like what on earth is going on, attention, you have some attention towards it. And I think this is cross species, because you can literally see in the comments of that tune on SoundCloud, people are being like, yeah, this is the point where my dog went crazy. So, so it's clearly acting on quite a evolutionarily, seen across many, many species, brain mechanism. And I think that, DJs can use this in creative ways to create that sense of like unease or excitement. Then there's this idea of controlling the energy in the room. And for this, I wanted to sort of discuss what Eric was talking about contagion, this idea that tracks have intrinsic emotional qualities to them. And through your track choice, you can guide people's emotions using these as like tools. I'll try and explain contagion from a slightly different perspective that Eric showed the example of that guy who was dancing and then everyone started joining in. I'll explain it in a slightly different way, which is if you have person A and person B, let's say your person A, person B is your mate, and they're talking to you and they're not telling you anything specific, but you can understand how they're feeling based on your communication with them. If your mate is sad, you can detect it pretty quickly. There are clearly features, non-verbal features in their voice and in their body language, etc., that you can use as cues. And there are clearly entire brain networks dedicated to extracting this information from when you talk to someone. These brain centers that are extracting this information, they might not necessarily be able to tell whether it's a human making these noises or a very human-like object, like a violin, which has very similar frequency content, or a guitar or a lead synth. So these instruments might still activate these emotional pathways, even though it's not really a human voice that's activating these emotional pathways. So yeah, you can replace person A with music, and that might still activate to some degree the same neural networks that were being activated before, to create these complex emotions. And that's one way in which, you know, dance music clearly exerts its effects on people. How we describe dance music, these are some of the adjectives we use to describe dance music: loud, aggressive, fast, bassy, intense. And when you, and the kinds of feelings that you feel when you listen to dance music are excitement, energy, you know, all of these things. And this is how a person speaks and acts when they're excited and when they're aroused and when they're, you know, feeling energetic. They talk louder, they might talk slightly more aggressively, or their voice might crackle at certain points, might be a bit harsher, but they'll talk faster, like me right now. They might talk more intensely, high energy, you know. So yeah, the music reflects these things. And finally, I want to talk about how you can play something that can draw people in. You know, you can draw these sort of peripheral people who, when you know you play at a night, there are loads of different degrees of people. There are people who are there for the music, love the music. There are their mates who don't really care about the music too much. They're interested, but they don't care too much. And then maybe beyond that, mates of those guys' mates who don't like electronic music. And this is a discussion I was having with Object Blue, who is also an incredible DJ. He's also playing next week in Oxford, so you guys should come. She was talking about this idea of, she likes to give something to draw in all of these lost lambs, these peripheral people, trying to play something that they can relate to, these people who aren't into like underground, really niche electronic music, which is historically quite inaccessible at times. And she does that by, you know, it might be dropping a familiar vocal sample in a remix track. And playing that, it gives people who are not necessarily so interested in electronic music something to connect with, something that they enjoy, and they might draw their attention to that a bit more, and they're more attentive to the rest of the set as a result, and they're more likely to find stuff that they enjoy within that set going forward as a result. So playing on familiarity, playing on people's, like, you know, history of music to try and relate to people, try and relate to everyone. And the mechanism by which I think this is working is through episodic memory. There is, of course, memories associated with music, and music is often associated with memories of yours. A lot of really positive memories of mine are associated and deeply entrenched with music. So it's no surprise that when I hear music similar to that, I feel something, you know, it activates similar sort of emotional centers in my brain. And I think that it's acting on my episodic memory. This is, of course, you know, the conscious recollection of music paired with valenced events, and valence can be positive or negative. And yeah, it's just one way in which DJs can, you know, you can employ familiarity in your track choice to draw people in, create a reaction, create some energy. So yeah, I've discussed 4 different ways in which DJs might be able to get a reaction from the crowd. Ultimately, you want people to have a good time. You want to captivate people. You want to play an interesting set. These are 4 ways in which you can do it. These, of course, work in parallel. And of course, there are so many other ways in which you can do it as well. These are just 4. I've had to pick and choose which I talk about. But yeah, just know that there are there's, you know, other stuff, and there's other processes, other, you know, psychological explanations for other things as well. And they all happen in parallel. They can all relate to each other. they all affect each other. And yeah, I just wanted to make that point. But yeah, if there's anything out here or anything else that anyone wants to talk to me about, either in the Q&A or afterwards, I would love that. And yeah, you guys at home also ask me some interesting questions, because I'd be yeah, this stuff is really interesting. I'm glad that I got to work with Eric for this, because it's really helped me think about more specifically these things that I've always kind of felt or had some sort of vague emotional understanding of, but never put it down into words and explanations. And thank you, Eric, for enabling that. Yeah, it's been kind of mind-opening for me, you know. Yeah, thank you very much.
That's the one thought that I might try and kind of vaguely wrap up at the end, but since time is short and we've covered so much area, I think the best thing we can do is straight into people having questions, Q&A, and
Right.
it's going to.
Yes, well, thank you, all of you, for wonderful presentations. So I'll just look, we've got, oh, no. No, yeah. So those who are online do put questions as opposed to problems in the Q&A, and we will take them. But so now we will turn to audience. Right, so taking the front first.
Yeah, thank you everybody, all three, for really excellent talks. They're very different. I think with a question for anyone in particular, because the question I think applies equally in different ways to everybody. So I don't know if there's enough time for anyone to answer on it. But I wanted to kind of follow up on something that Ragnar said in the second talk, which is to do with kind of becoming in a flow state, or this kind of like mode of action, which you might describe as fluid, or people have in various literatures. That can also be contrasted, I think, with like this idea of deliberation. And when you're doing the inner flow state, and you're in this mode of agency where there's no kind of internal thought process. And to me, there's something very, very interesting about like these kinds of things, whether they're like tying shoelaces or listening for an hour to techno in a nightclub, because it's kind of the absence of in a monologue and deliberation, which is what keeps the flow state going through. So I wonder if something that's really important here is kind of understanding how there's a kind of loss of attention and also a kind of loss of self, which is really at the basis of why someone might feel wakeful for an abnormally long period of time. It's kind of related to how you might be more fatigued after like a really intense 2 hours of mental deliberation. It's the deliberation which kind of saps your cognitive resources. So I guess one question would be, there's probably lots of theories in cognitive science and neuroscience which might give kind of a scientific basis to that. So I wondered if anyone knew if anyone had anything to say.
I think it was addressed to Ragnar, wasn't it?
It was kind of,
in the first, yeah.
Standing on something.
The sound is a bit difficult to hear in the audience. Because I don't know if there is a microphone, or could you just repeat it quite loudly and shortly?
Perhaps Eric, if Eric could perhaps summarize that.
Perhaps I could just about. So I think the question was the flow state that is that you mentioned in both mech-tech and electrotech. This flow state is partly to do with the suppression of a kind of internal monologue, and to do with, and possibly is the kind of state that one is in after a long period of kind of conscious engagement with something. And are there explanations within neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, for instance, that might help us to understand why these flow states happen in the kind of way that you suggest?
Yeah, I don't know how the neuroscience side of this is. Perhaps that's a question for Michael, since he studied medicine. But I work on a interdisciplinary center together with neuropsychologists. So it is an interesting topic that I could explore there. So Csikszentmihalyi, he talks more about this phenomenological perspective of flow and is not that concerned with neuroscience aspects.
And I think one kind of explanation that has been offered is, and Ragnar mentioned this in her talk actually, is a kind of breakdown of what we normally think of being a fairly distinct relationship between subjects and objects. That under many ordinary everyday circumstances, for instance, reading up a jug, I'm quite clearly aware of the relationship between this thing as an object and myself as a subject acting in relation to it. But that in other kinds of circumstances, and music is one, but not the only one, people can, in a sense, that they find that the boundary between the subject and object becomes extremely porous and in some cases almost entirely erased. In the case of music, arguably, that is because music, the physicality of music is a very peculiar and rather distributed kind of thing. We tend to think of music as having not really any physical reality. It's just, you know, sound waves in the air kind of thing. And yet, it has the kind of profound and material effects on our physiology and on our nervous system, and the way in which sound can be both ambient, i.e. you can fill a space, and also focal, it can be a thing that we appear to concentrate on, also gives it this very kind of floating property, which some people have said has allowed that kind of state of consciousness, you might say, I mean, the kind of flow state of consciousness, to be particularly readily achieved in musical circumstances. But as I was saying, you know, people describe it being a state of flow in lots of other, you know, sculptors and painters and writers and mathematicians and problem solvers in virtually every domain will say that they will describe experiences which they have apparently lost all sense of both themselves and of external reality for long periods of time.
I can also add that Csikszentmihalyi, he says that when people goes into state of flow, it's usually when they get some challenges that are not too challenging, but yet that challenge them in some way. And for example, if you are creating something or producing something, then it's kind of relatable. But I also think that in a state of listening to music or dancing, it's kind of it's not that you are absent from the music, you are attending to it, and it challenges you, but not too much. So therefore you go into this that's kind of necessary, I think, to enter this state of flow.
Okay, thank you. Now we do have a question online, so I'll take that one next. I wonder if it's possible to apply this kind of framework for wakefulness attention to other genres, for example, ambient music or outside of electronic music.
Great question. And there is a significant history of very extended pieces of music. There's a piece by the French composer Eric Satie, for instance, called Vexation or Vexations in English, which involves a tiny fragment of music which lasts for no more than about half a minute, but which has to be repeated an enormous number of times. It takes about 24 hours to perform the piece. It's a solo piano piece. I know a couple of people who have performed it. In one case in a duo, which they took it in turns over a period of about 24 hours to perform it. But the music has this kind of, the piece, Satie composed the piece very, I think very astutely, in that it consists of a peculiar phrase of music, which has some sort of recognizable features, some harmonies that one might recognize, but which I think that camera is the one that was supposed to be on.
This one. It's this one that's pointing to you.
I know, but we could be if we go to video
And yes, that one, and then change.
and then go to the top one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
But yes, Vexation is composed out of this, and going back to what the point that Michael was making about kind of weird stuff, and also about something having this mixture between recognizability and difference. The Vexations has this property that you can never quite grasp what it is, and yet it's very recognizable. It's repeated something like 840 times, so it's you get to hear this same material an awful lot. but somehow it just keeps going. So the idea that there might be music that that induces long periods of wakefulness, or at least has this idea of kind of extended consciousness, is actually something. I mean, Satie proposed that at the end of the 19th century. So there is music, and Brian Eno, as we know, has been created a whole lot of ambient music, music for air. There's an album called Music for Airports, a whole of ambient music that was designed to kind of occupy spaces and to have this kind of very extended quality about it.
Great, thank you. Yes.
No, I was going to ask, I think that kind of like covers it, and you covered it right at the end, where it was like about sort of like, you know, slave songs and like work songs, things like that. They're not necessarily electronic music, but they do contribute to long hours of wakefulness because their purpose is to keep people awake and work.
Yeah.
So they can go on forever. But
Yeah. No. Great.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I just have a question for everyone, sort of about, I think it was, something about mystery when it came to electrotech aesthetic and it kind of mediating between a space of mystery in a cyberspace sense. And I was talking with my tutor about the sense of mystery in the context of like the acid house race for 80s, and she was saying mystery is dead in our like world, and in this sense we talking about how it was like really opposing quite violent football fans coming together in that particular scene. And I wanted to ask about what you guys think the kind of presence of mobile phones and the accountability that comes with those like multiple lenses and gazes has on like wakefulness, and whether you think that can like interrupt the flow state, and because there's not this same sense of losing time and space, because they kind of hold things accountable and really basic accessibility of like live streaming, live recording. That's
For the sake of Ragnhild, did you hear any of that, Ragnhild?
Oh, I couldn't hear that question. Could you translate or?
I'll give a very short moment.
Yes.
So it was really about, so the question was to do with the impact of ubiquitous mobile phones and the kind of pervasive effects of social media, and of constantly being, in a sense, monitored and in the gaze of that social media. Does that damage the sense of kind of flow and mystery in particular that might be associated with well, with electrotech in your case, or other forms of music?
Yeah.
Michael, also, just a moment.
I mean, I've definitely noticed people like within these like weird electronic music forums and stuff say, oh yeah, music is dead, all these kids on their phones these days. You know, people do complain about this stuff, and these people clearly have a problem with it and seem to think it does have an effect. Yeah, I don't know, I guess we're sort of in between generation, and I definitely have entered the flow state multiple times. And yeah, maybe I don't use my phone as much as younger people. It is interesting to think about, like, do younger people who might be on their phones longer, is it harder for them to enter the flow state and appreciate music in that way? I don't know. Is there any way of knowing? Like, yeah, it's something I've thought about, and you know, some people seem to think it's a problem. I don't know how much of a problem it is really, because you know, at the individual level, I think if you want to enter the flow state, you can stop going on your phone and try and enter the flow state.
Ragnhild, did you want to?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because we live in an age where things are very fragmented, and where we have everything available to us. So in one way, we could think that everything is normalized now, that there is nothing that surprises us or excites us because we are so exposed to everything. But still, I think that we are very, I think that we are, that our brain is operating on different level kinds of, so I think that we are context sensitive. So for example, when in popular music, in EDM and hip hop, manipulation of the voice is very common, and a cut of vocal is you can hear that in almost every songs at the hit list. But still, we do not, if a person next to us would start speaking in a stuttering way, we would react, right? Or speaking in an auto-tuned way, we would react. So we are context sensitive. We know that this is in the musical context, we know that that's very normal, but in everyday context, it's not normal. And when experiencing these sounds, I think that we kind of experience them at two levels at once. We understand it as completely normal in that setting, but yet we also understand it as a vocal that is being manipulated, and that this kind of creates an interest, even though it's not a shock, but still it is kind of a peculiar sound, just like glitchy sounds. We understand them as very normal, but we do understand them as glitching, which means that we understand them at two levels at once.
Thank you. Yes.
I was wondering, maybe Michael, but anybody can thought about like, now struggling to remember the word, but bass music, which is so bassy that it's below where you can hear it. It's quite popular with DJs, and like this kind of idea of like affect. And I'm currently doing a study, doing a dissertation on like deaf musicking and how deaf people interact with raves. And I'm wondering about like whether that can help them listen to music. So I'm wondering if you do buy into that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and like, do you use that in your own mixing? Or
Not consciously. I mean, probably happens. But I definitely think there is a place for playing like, you know, sub bass stuff, like, you know, below 20 hertz. And if you can have the sound system that can reproduce some of that, I think it can create a massive like arousing effect. You know, when you go into certain clubs, like Berghain, perfect example, where the sound system is, I think, one of the main reasons why I enjoy going there. And yeah, even if I didn't have the whole upper half of the frequency range, I think I could still really very much feel music, you know, feel it on a physical sense, not on an auditory sense. And yeah, that is cool to think about. It's like probably tie in the medicine stuff as well, mostly like thinking about how you can bring this kind of musical enjoyment and engagement and all the benefits that come from music to deaf people. It might be sub-frequency stuff. Catch you after a bit about the sounds cool.
Right, very good. So we've got one online, then I'll probably take the final one from the room. But we do have wine afterwards, so people can mingle and continue. So this is from Christy. And for Eric, do you think emotional musical contagion could happen between individuals in a virtual community? So are we creating?
Yeah, great question. Yes. I mean, in a way, I think the short answer is, first of all, yes, it can. And I think to some extent, you know, music is already, in a sense, a kind of virtual world that we enter into willingly. As Michael was saying in his own presentation about emotional contagion, about how the way in which music can appear to convey qualities that are like the qualities of a human being. And there's an increasing literature in the psychology of music about how people relate to music as if it were a virtual person. I think in that sense, already the relationship between music and individuals who are in the same physical space is a kind of mixture of a real and a virtual relationship. And therefore, I think it's certainly possible that in a purely virtual world, i.e., I suppose you mean, Christy, online, if you, as it were, that people can indeed have a powerful sense of both musical and other kinds of contagious relationships in those virtual worlds. Yeah,
I mean, yeah, I think it's a definite yes for me. That it happens virtually. I think pretty much all music that we listen to happens on some level virtually or online. You know, all the SoundCloud, Spotify, etc. And I think that represents some form of contagion between the maker of the music and the recipient. You know, whenever I listen to, you know, certain kinds of music, I feel like I'm understanding something about the person who made it. It's a really abstract feeling, and like, you know, nothing specific to it, but I feel like I can empathize with what they went through to create, you know, such a passage of music. So I think that the contagion thing is definitely happening in those situations, completely virtual situations. I don't know these guys who are making these tracks. But yeah, I think it does happen.
And you also had virtual choirs, didn't you, during
lockdown? fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it almost asks the reverse question, which is there still anything particularly special about the non-virtual situation of being in a room with, you know, a live musician playing on a physical instrument? I mean, I'm persuaded that there is still something compelling about that, but it, you know, that is becoming almost like the exception, and that the virtual is kind of more like the rule.
Oh, apart from at clubs.
Yes.
But in a way, at clubs as well, there's a
Yeah.
degree of
Mm.
you're downloading tracks from the internet that you're
Yeah.
piecing together.
Yeah.
And so it's not all stuff that you're making completely originally from scratch yourself.
No, but you're in
Yeah, you're
an enclosed
just
room
tying
with
stuff
bodies.
together.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, yes, so no question.
Yeah, thanks so much for talk, super interesting. I was just thinking about what how it helps people enter this flow state, and people who struggle to enter the flow state. So you probably all seen like those binaural rhythms, Spotify, and and say that one step further, people with more severe experience where you have disordered thoughts, disordered sleep. I just wanted to ask all of you, where do you think music and EDM rhythms fits into potentially therapy for those things? Binaural beats and Spotify or otherwise.
So just briefly for Ragnhild, the question was, how can thinking about EDM or other kinds of music or other kinds of sonic sonic materials help with those people who find it difficult to enter into the flow state, those people who need you know, binaural beats or other kinds of ways in which they can help to concentrate on things, people who suffer from, I suppose, you know, ADHD and other forms of attentional disorder. Are there ways in which we can think about music and EDM music perhaps in particular in relation to those problems?
I think yes. Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that, because I mean that's kind of what I want to do really in the future. That's kind of what I'm interested in, and I know Tom's a medic as well. In my and yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And yeah, I definitely think there is scope for the use of music in these settings, and it might not be that the music is the only thing that's helping people, you know, capture attention or enable them to enter into a certain state of mind, which might mean they're more receptive to certain kinds of therapy. You know, I think you can pair music with things like medication, talking therapy, and it might have like, it might just make those therapies slightly more beneficial. You know, it might like add a 5% benefit or something, but it's an extremely cheap intervention. You know, so yeah, I think there are so many ways in which music can be used and should be used in healthcare in ways that is not done so currently. I mean, I've literally been working on the wards and doing stuff every week for the past few weeks. I've been going in and playing people music on the wards, and the reactions I get from that are honestly amazing. Like stroke patients who, when their families see them and they're dancing and singing, they're like, that is the first time that they've spoken since their stroke. You know, there's these really powerful effects of music in the work, in the healthcare world that has such positive benefits. It can be in ADHD, but you know, I'm thinking way more broadly than that. There's so many, you know, music reduces post-operative analgesic requirements. Music helps surgeons focus better. Music is helpful in, as you said, autistic spectrum disorders and ADHD, group therapy sessions, and making those people tend to perform better. And yeah, I think there's just so many ways in which we can use music. I mean, not many people are implementing that too much, even though it's, you know, relatively simple, straightforward, or can be. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, with all the possibilities lying in front for medical and healthcare. But so thank you all three. Ragnhild, I'm sorry that you won't be able to join us for drinks, but thank you very much for joining us from Oslo. And so we'd just like to thank our speakers, and then we'll just have a couple of announcements as well. So just to say that this is going to be available online shortly as well, should you wish to recap and play it endlessly when you get into the trance. But also we've got a podcast up from our previous seminar, which was on sleep, light and architecture, which was Russell Foster and Ian Ritchie. And quite shortly we will have a podcast which will feature Michael and Eric. So I hope you will look out for that. It's on be on our website, which is Sleep and the Rhythms of Life, available at Torch. So thank you to all. And now you can come and enjoy some drinks. And thank you to everyone online.
Yes.